Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to our monthly Learning Leaders webinar. This is our 5th edition, and I am incredibly excited to be talking about diversity and inclusion. You'll notice that we have a sign interpreter, Dima, who is joining us. And thank you, Dima, for helping us today. For those people that are hearing impaired but are still able to participate in today's session, which is something that I am really interested in, mostly because as I learn, we have for some time now been offering our learnership products to companies that are required to provide these to candidates who are or have a disability of some sort, that being a mental or physical disability. And we have different feedback from different clients about doing this, and some companies have the capability to accommodate these people and some don't. Some wing it and some do it with very thoughtful strategies and are able to use it commercially and well in their businesses. So to help kickstart our discussion this morning, we have Lisa Bradshaw, who's joining us as our keynote speaker, who has had over 21 years experience in consulting in diversity and inclusion, and obviously shares our passion for working with these individuals and companies. Lisa, will you join me on stage? We are really, there you are, thank you. We're really excited to have you today, and thank you so much for being so accommodating and for sharing your sage wisdom with us today.
Thanks so much, Richard. Happy to be here. I'm really looking forward to the topic.
Yeah, us too. I'm going to leave you to it. Thank you.
All right, great. So welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us on the topic of diversity and inclusion and the benefits this has to business. So my particular area of expertise lies specifically around disability inclusion. I own a company called Bradshaw Consulting, and we've been working for many years towards creating or unlocking the economy to become inclusive for talent with a disability. So whether it's through our recruitment division, where we source and place talent with a disability, or through our consulting and assessment division, our mandate is to be able to say, we'll find and develop and build the right talent with a disability to feed into the economy. But on the other side, we're going to make sure that we work with various organizations and structures to ensure that we level the playing field so the opportunities to compete successfully in the economy is made real. And so a lot of the work that we do is around creating awareness around this form of diversity, raising disability consciousness, and also shifting your thoughts, your strategies, and your cultures towards realizing the benefits that this form of diversity brings to business. So today's chat, I thought we'd put it in the context of what we're all experiencing at the moment, which is a very shifting and fluid economy. We've all been smacked with the COVID brush and with the economy and with ups and downs, and as businesses, there's a couple of really prevalent tools that we have to have in order to survive and compete in this shifting economy. And from my perspective, I get all excited when this kind of shift happens, because what it means is it's a fantastic opportunity for us to look at how we've been doing things, what hasn't been working so well, what we can change or drop, and what new innovations or new approaches we can introduce that will ultimately result in a better performance within our economy. And so the whole thing about disability inclusion, for me, this is an absolutely ideal time to start having this conversation. I think we're all very used to talking about disability from a compliance perspective. We know that from a compliance
it looks like Lisa's connectivity unfortunately hit a glitch. So we're going to have to roll with the punches, and in fact, we will try and get it back. But in the interim, let's bring on our other panel speakers, that being Nikki Poseidonhout from EDEF and Pearl Mashabani, who's an independent consultant in diversity and inclusion. You guys can join me on the stage and put on your cameras. We can kickstart our discussion a little earlier, perhaps while Lisa's getting her tech right. So there we go. There's Nikki. How you doing, Nikki? And
thank you. Thanks.
And there's Pearl. Fantastic. How's it? So sorry, guys. Lisa's tech didn't work out, so I thought we'll get started in the interim. I wanted to thank everybody who registered to attend today. A lot of you provided us with guidance and had specific questions for our panel today, and that has helped guide us in defining what we're going to be talking about today. So the first question, Pearl, if you'll help with your with getting involved in this one, which I particularly like, and that is, how can you make inclusion part of our leaders of our businesses' focus and strategy, and to move beyond it being a requirement for legislation and compliance only?
Hey, Richard, and hi, everybody. And by the way, that's a beautiful question. I'm really excited about this session because in the field of diversity and inclusion, you'll realize that disability inclusion tends to take a back seat. So I'm really looking forward to Lisa coming back and sharing with us how we get that back on center stage. But in regard to the question that you are asking, one of the first things that you need to do is that you need to realize that diversity and inclusion in an organization is everybody's responsibility. While it's true that the change has to be led from the top, and that's where you need to start, you also have, at the same time, work with a bottom-up strategy. So one of the key things that you can do to make sure that you mainstream inclusion in the entire organization is make sure that your top leadership, be that the board, the CEO, the MD, the executive leadership, are rallied around a common vision of what they are trying to create when they say we want to bring diversity and inclusion into the organization. And the reason I'm saying that is that if you skip the stage and you start with all other interventions, you're going to get a lot of roadblocks along the way where people are saying, oh, but I thought we were doing this. Oh, I thought we were doing that. So make sure that people are working from the same page. One of the key things that you can do is make sure that your top leadership, as the cultural ambassadors of your organization, go through an inclusive leadership workshop. That's where they're going to understand the imperatives for inclusion from a business perspective, from a socio-economic perspective, from an investor perspective, as well as from a moral perspective. I know that one of the key things that we use in corporate is the business case, but make sure that you try and touch on all the different business cases, because where I come from and with my experience, I don't just see it as a business imperative. It has a bigger impact in society as well, especially when you look at South Africa and the kind of history where we come from, and also looking at globally what's happening right now. It shows you that lack of inclusion, and especially the lack of examples from top leadership, can truly disentangle society. And that society is made up of your employees. So key thing, diversity and inclusion workshops, or in particular, inclusive leadership workshop for your top structure, because they are the cultural ambassadors. We'll talk about the bottom-up approach later on in the session.
All right, cool. So tell me a little about the workshop, and what would you want to expose the leadership to? What's the sort of core outcomes you would want to achieve in a workshop like that?
Okay, so in that you want them to understand, like I said earlier, the imperatives. Why is this important for our business? and what are we going to focus on as a business? Because diversity and inclusion landscape is so vast and it's so wide. It's the issues around gender, it's disabilities, millennials, it's nationality. So you want to be very clear about setting goals in terms of what are we going to focus on? Do we understand the legislations? Because it's not just a nice to do. There are actual legislations around this. You also want to make sure that when they come out of that type of workshop, they know how to lead inclusively. So they have multicultural competencies. They are disability aware. So when they go back to their teams, they are aware of how do I greet? How do I show up? Who do I have coffee with? What are the little things, the microaggressions that I might be committing that, you know, are alienating people without me even realizing that I've been doing that, because they have to set that tone.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Yeah, thank you. I mean, that gives us a lot of insight, and really, you know, the purpose of these sessions is for people to go away and have tactical how-to strategies and what they can do in their businesses. So that's what sort of wanted to, you know, focus on that. Nikki, you are with EDEF, supporting those with hard of hearing, and I would think that's a particularly difficult disability, together with perhaps being blind as well, are probably the two most significant. How have you found companies accepting people with hard of hearing disabilities and getting them to see it as perhaps a commercial opportunity?
So deaf people fall into three distinct categories. It's deaf with a capital D, then the deafened group, and the hard of hearing group. So I think it's just changing people's mindsets, really. We think it's difficult. I mean, a lot of clients who I meet with, they're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to communicate with these people? So the area that we focus on specifically is the deaf with a capital D group, which those people are usually born deaf, profoundly deaf, may or may not wear hearing aids, and use sign language as their primary means of communication. So that's really our focus area. And it's interesting because I've been to clients before where some people have been deafened, and that might be through an accident, or and that usually happens later in life, deafened through an accident or old age, some kind of trauma. Interestingly, we also have drugs that have been shipped from America, and some of these are HIV antiretrovirals, which are otostatic. So they have one of the byproducts is that it causes deafness. So Americans have thought that it's a good idea to ship these drugs to poor old Africa, and it must surely be worse to have AIDS than to be deaf. And so deafness can be caused by drugs as well that are available on the South African market. But there's lots to talk about, and I'll hand back to Lisa if she wants to continue, since we've got her back up and running.
Yeah, I think let's continue with our discussion, and we can bring Lisa in as part of it now, seeing as though we've kickstarted. But Nikki, I'd be interested to know, in your experience, and how you've managed to integrate well people that are deaf into a business. Is it a specific role, and how has an organization accepted people with this disability?
Yeah, so I meet with generally two groups of clients. So it's either the have-tos or the want-tos. And I love that little magic button right in the middle, a good balance of both. And I love what Paul said, is that it starts with me. So the have-to companies, the ones that need to be compliant, I'll meet with an HR manager, for example, and they want to bring in disability and integrate people well. But they're not the person with a disability, the deaf person isn't going to be working in their team. So then then it goes down to the line manager, and it's surprise, we've decided to bring a deaf person onto your team, and the guy looks at you like they literally grimace. like I've just stapled his finger to a whiteboard or something, like, oh my gosh, thanks a lot. You're making it my problem now. And so the 1-2s are usually the company sweetheart. So they're passionate about righting the wrongs of the past. They're really the drivers for change. The have-dos come from maybe more of a oh shame, and we love to say that as South Africans. Whenever I tell people I work with the deaf community, they're like, oh shame. It's not oh shame, it should be oh wow. So we need to change the narrative from oh shame, this person with a disability, to oh wow, you're amazing, you are going to add massive value to our company. So there are a whole lot of things that deaf people are more capable of that add value to the company. So they're highly focused, they've got good attention to detail, they're very dexterous. I'll give you an example. I went to a company, it's Hesto Harnessing in Stanger, and they employ over 60 deaf people. So they have this little workshop dojo that they do, and basically they don't care, you know, that you've got matric with maths and science. They care about how good are you with your hands. So they do this little dojo test. And I thought, well, I'm going to be very good at this because I'm, you know, I'm fluent in sign language. Let me at your test, kind of thing. And so I can't give you all the secrets of their dojo, but they have a number of little tests that they run that see whether you are dexterous or not. And the deaf people absolutely saw, and they haven't done it from a compliance perspective. They've done it from deaf people add value in the manufacturing environment because they're very good with their hands. They've got great attention to detail. They're not distracted by their peers. And when you go into the workshop, you see these machines running like this, and the deaf people are just, it's amazing.
That's fantastic. I'll give you another similar example. We have a client that needed to do a disabled learnership and particularly chose a hard of hearing and candidates that were deaf. And they put them in a video surveillance department where they had to monitor a fleet of buses. And they did it on a trial basis for the year. And it was so successful that they eventually went on to employ them full time. So yeah, that's why I was interested to understand, are there preferential roles for those sort of candidates? But yeah, it's amazing to hear how businesses have integrated them. Pearl, I'd love to hear from you because you've had so much consulting experience in different companies and seen different environments. And you know, like, where have you seen, you know, how the rest of the business, or how you've gotten the rest of the business to accept and welcome, let's say, diversity, all right? Maybe not necessarily only disability, you know, which takes into account Black economic empowerment and all of those sort of things. And, you know, perhaps other than it, you know, which you alluded to earlier, sort of it having to start from the top, you know, how can you really initiate a culture shift in terms of diversity?
Right. So I'm going to start with, let me build on from what I said earlier. So we've already spoken about how the top leadership has to steer the ship, right? So the second part of this is that you don't want diversity and inclusion to be a standalone program in the organization, you know, something that is led by HR or your transformation department. You want to weave it into every aspect of the business. So there are 5 key things that the global diversity and inclusion benchmarks look at. Number 1, you want to make sure that your leadership is on par with you. I've already spoken about that. 2, it has to be communicated throughout the organization. So the entire organization needs to know that this is the direction that we are taking. 3, you need to have clear goals and measurements in place so you know whether we're succeeding or not. Remember, I said earlier that diversity dimensions are so broad. So pick 3, 4 things maybe that you are going to focus on so you can get those quick wins. And that also generates excitement because people are very skeptical. They think, yo, this is wishy-washy. But when they see movement with those quick wins, then it's very easy to buy them in. 4, have your internal as well as external focus on diversity. The internal one, this is one that Lisa touched on earlier, your HR processes. So have those targets, you know, whether it's women, it's people with disabilities, your training, your internal communications, your advertising. So look at those types of representation. So every single department in your organization should have a role. Another important thing is that you want different classes of employees, regardless of rank, coming through voluntarily as champions for diversity and inclusion. And this is one of my favorite things to do in the workplace. Because, you know, with the senior leadership, sometimes it could be malicious compliance. Well, the MD said so. But with your employees, people are very passionate. I mean, when you look at the amount of activism that we have on any given day regarding, you know, any diversity factor, you realize that you actually need to harness that energy that people have and make it maybe say 10% of their KPAs, where they become part of your champions. So you can have ones that are lead disability and inclusion in the workplace. You have ones that lead the LGBTQI causes, gender and diversity. There's also one that I think is important for new employees in the workplace, because, you know, they come in and they are transition blues. So focus on the biggest needs that you have. So as the top leadership is doing their bit to be brand ambassadors, you also have, you know, employees also coming through, you know, building that, you know, cohesion around this common agenda.
Superb, thank you. That's such great insights. Lisa, welcome back. I see the technical gremlins got the better of you.
Did I not say flexibility was absolutely key? You can have your fiber, you can have an inverter, backup, and you can have your cell phone signal, but when Eskom load sheds, it's going to take everything down.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So apologies. But there we are, flexibility at its best. Yeah, I think I just wanted to, just jumping on with what Nikki and Pearl had to say. I think that what's really important is the messaging of disability inclusion is about saying that we've got to recognize the value of this kind of diversity to business. So I want to just give you an example about how the talents persons with a disability have and they're able to bring to business lie principally or very well aligned to what we need as businesses to compete in today's economy. Flexibility, innovation, the competitive edge, and loyalty. And I think that if we look at things like flexibility, again, it's being able to say, how do we level the playing fields or identify the disabling factor that's going to allow a person with a disability to compete like everybody else? And that comes to how we shift the way we do business. Innovation, I want to tell you, and I think this is a very underrepresented thought. People with disabilities are excellent problem solvers and innovators. And the reason is because we've had to learn to navigate in a society that excludes. I want to tell you, when I went to university, I went to Rhodes, and it was the most inaccessible university ever because it's all monumental buildings. And policy dictates you can't deface a monumental building by putting a ramp on it, you see, even though the ramp would be wood and it wouldn't touch the building. No. So this is how my entrepreneurial spirit started, because I had to negotiate to get everything done. If I wanted to go to lectures, I'd write one essay a term for my principal pusher, who would take me from the res to the lectures every day. I also held the power with the only backdoor key to the res. So I had the power to let all those late sneakers come in the back, you know what I mean? And we had like this negotiation thing going, and I had this little business going where eventually I was able to navigate around Rhodes, get everything done despite all the barriers. And I think that people underestimate how many barriers in a day you have to solve the problem for. If I just look at lockdown, we've got some great candidates on our bursary management program that we run. And in lockdown, they had all their assistive devices on campus at the university, but now all of a sudden they're having to do assignments and everything online. But when you're visually impaired and you need Zoom technology, it's very hard to do that and to read textbooks on your phone without, you know, the Zoom, the large screens and the assistive technology. So we had WhatsApp groups where people who were good at typing You would voice note your assignment, and then somebody who was good at typing would type the assignment, send it back to you, and you could then send it off. We made a plan. And I think that that's what's needed in business today. We're going to be coming up with all sorts of challenges, and we need people who can focus on, well, what is the disabling factor in this situation? It's not necessarily to do with an impairment. The disabling factor could be your internet dropping in the middle of a webinar. What is the disabling factor, and what can we do to resolve it? So I think that we need to look at that. My last point to make, just quickly, is to say that we underestimate the spend power of people with a disability. It's 15% of our world's population. It's the largest minority group in the world, okay? The value of the purple pound, as an example, they did a study in Europe, and the value of the purple pound is, it's massive. It's something like 7 million people are of a working age group in the UK, and their spend pound is reckoned to be 249 billion pounds. Okay, it's a lot of money we spend. And you know what else we do? We have family that make consumer decisions based on our needs as well. Where we go to holiday, what shop we will choose to purchase at, what type of product we'll buy. These are all influenced by a consumer market that's influenced by disability and its thought process. Now, that's a lot of money out there. It's a market the size of China. And we as business, we haven't even recognized its consumer potential, and we haven't even recognized the potential talent pool that lurks in that demographic. So how do we understand that consumer population if we're not exposed to disability, if we're not exposed to the diversity of this demographic, and if it hasn't become normal in our natural thinking? And I think that that's something that we really need to start to explore. I love having these market researchers, you know, in stores where you go and you purchase something, and the market researcher said, can you tell me why you choose your product? And they've got like price, and they've got brand, and I go, it's because I can reach it. It's on the right shelf. I can reach their product, but nowhere. They don't know what box to put that in the market research. So I think disability, if we shift our thinking, we say compliance, we all understand it's a reality, but the motivation for this inclusion must lie in the fact that we recognize the value of this form of diversity to our economy, and we want to set it up so that we can tap into that value.
I love that. And as a commercially minded person, my brain is just popping with ideas here. I mean, you spoke about globally 15% of the population. Do you know local stats and perhaps variations in type of disabilities and any of that sort of thing?
Okay, I'll tell you straight up that for all of you who are Googling stats in South Africa of persons with a disability, you're all going to come to the 2011 Stats SA census, which is probably the last kind of, there we go. Okay, there is very unreliable statistics, and the reason is because, firstly, there's a lot of confusion as to what the definition of disability is. So if you include people...
Let me jump in there. Why is there confusion in that?
Because traditionally we look at disability from a physical or visible perspective. So when we say disability, we look at blind, deaf, and in a wheelchair. We look at functional impact. We don't look at nuances. And at the end of the day, things like bipolar or epilepsy or asthma, all of these may or may not be a disability, depending on the impact and the severity and where they are in this functional line, so to speak. So how much they limit in the context that you live in. And so the definition, what we tend to do is exclude all the non-visible disabilities, which is your mental and your psychiatric disabilities, which ironically is the most commonly represented form of disability in our workforce today. We just don't know it. So, but it's estimated 8 to 12% of the South African population have a disability, according to the general rural stats.
Well, that's a pretty big number on a population of 60 million. You're talking about 8-9 million people.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, as you said, Pearl, maybe you've got some insight into this, but sort of mental disability is becoming really, I think, becoming an organizational challenge. You interview someone you do the psychometric assessments, and if they don't disclose that, or maybe they don't even know yet that there is perhaps a mental disability, how should an organization approach this?
I think this is very important, Richard, because the age that we're living in with COVID-19, it's magnifying the issue of mental wellness now more than ever. I was just looking at stats that last year, 1 in 5 people reported having some kind of mental health disability. But now with COVID-19, I can bet you it's probably maybe all of us.
Tripled.
I can bet you it has tripled. And I think every organization right now needs to put this as one of the on top of the agenda. Number one, we have to understand why is it that it's hard for us to speak about mental health in the workplace to start off with. And I think one, the lack of education. We don't understand what mental health is. We think, it's something that, it's psychiatric, you should be closed off, you're dangerous. So it comes with a lot of stigmas and a lot of ignorance. So the role of HR or whoever is leading diversity, inclusion, or transformation in the workplace is to put this on the agenda. Be very intentional about doing that. In the same way that we're able to report on other illnesses like your diabetes, high blood pressure, normalize making mental health part of your reporting, and not just in terms of data. Obviously, companies love data, so yes, still use that your health and wellness data. Use data from your national health systems, but also use stories. If you can get people that can champion the cause and say, listen, I'm not doing well I'm not doing well right now, and getting people to understand that mental health exists on a spectrum. So there is those of us who still go to the workplace, can still function, and then there's the other end of the spectrum where people cannot function at all, or without some kind of serious help. So by normalizing those conversations, bringing in the data, being intentional about it, that's the first step. Just, and also building in, I like what Lisa said earlier, it's not even about the mental health, it's about the disabling environment, the stigmatizing environment. So have those support systems in the workplace where people either can call somebody, have peer-to-peer interactions where people know, what, if I'm not doing well, there's a group in the workplace or a safe place in the workplace where I can go to.
Yeah, Richard, can I just hop on there quickly? Also, just make
Please.
a comment to say that, I've got a lot of candidates who have a psychiatric disability, and they think social distancing rocks. They think, finally, people aren't in my bubble. They're not crowding me. People are worried about germs as much as I am. It's lovely. And I think that people with disabilities are very often used to social isolation. So again, these are skills that we can actually help you navigate. And I think what's really important is that what you ultimately want, companies are very concerned about disclosure, and they're saying we want our employees to be able to disclose a disability. And it's so important, but in order for you to do that, you have to take the stigma away from the terminology of disability and what it means. So your awareness campaigning and your efforts to consistently put that messaging out there that normalizes disability, including psychiatric and mental health issues, it makes everyone lighten up and stop panicking. And once people can lighten up, then you get to get people that are a little bit more comfortable with disclosing and talking about it. And with that comes the relevant support and discussions and all the benefits that comes with it.
That's brilliant. Nikki, I would imagine you've had an enormous amount of experience in dealing with organizations that once they've made the decision, probably because of a legislation push initially, but once they've made the decision to be more inclusive of a person with a disability, perhaps who is deaf, in the organization, so now that probably comes from HR strategy linked to disabled learnerships, for example, that they have to do it, all right? talk me through the process that you would go through with an organization in onboarding these candidates into the organization and where you've seen it work really well.
Okay, so I want to start by sharing a quick story, if I may. We had a building launch, so we've got an existing building and we were expanding, and the building was sponsored by NASPERS. And I was so excited because I had invited Lisa to attend our launch. And so we were doing a revamp of the old building, and it's really old. It's not accessible at all. And obviously, coming from the background where our focus is very much deaf, we have the tendency to forget about every other disability group that exists out there. And so I was very proud of myself that my friend was coming and I was going to build this, you know, awesome disabled bathroom. I was like, please let Lisa need the loo. I really need her to use our bathroom. And so we did everything. Well, I thought I did everything by the book, and we had this amazing architect, and so we built this funky bathroom, and it's obviously bigger, and everyone wants to use the disabled bathroom. And we had the rail, and we had another rail, and you know, I thought I had ticked all the boxes. Anyway, Lisa pulls up in her absolutely spanking car that she has, and it drew a lot of attention, you know, and out she comes in her wheelchair. I said, Lisa, I'm so excited to show you our bathroom. Please come in and take a look around. And the first thing I noticed is that our door, thankfully it opened the right way, but was entirely too stiff for her to now reach out and navigate to get the door open in the first place. Then she said, your rail is in the wrong place. I can't reach that. And then when it came to, and she's so gracious, thankfully she has a wonderful sense of humor. And when it came to the mirror, you know, poor woman could like barely see, you know, the top of her head was going to look fine, not sure what's going on with the lipstick kind of thing. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll change that, you know, awkward situation. And then we go around to the back and we've got a ramp as well. We're going to take you up the ramp. And off we go up the ramp, only to find that there are 4 stairs between our ramp and the building that she needs to get to, which she is not going to navigate. Yeah, so she was like, please pack some goodies in a box for me, I'm going home. So our friendship
wasn't that bad. You gave me champagne and I kept quiet.
The point is, the disability expert is not always who you think it is. It's the disabled person, or the person who's in the wheelchair, or the person who's deaf. So I can always talk about deaf access, deaf accessibility, what to do in the workplace, how to change things up. But we always bring a deaf person onto site. So if that person is potentially going to work in that space, we always bring one of our consultants in to say, how is this going to work for you? Because we have to look through the eyes of the deaf person. So I'll tell you about a good case study from a client. So it was a smaller company, and they weren't, I think one of the flaws in, you know, bringing about a culture change is that companies think they need to do this massive marketing strategy. And I'm guilty of that because I work in marketing. So I'm like, hey, let's do a video, let's do a flyer, let's invite you to all these workshops that PS you have to attend. And then we're going to deaf by PowerPoint you and make you love this as much as we do. So anyway, we went to this company, we said, we do a compulsory deaf sensitization, we teach you about culture, sign language structure, do's and don'ts, how to greet a deaf person, etc., etc. And by the way, it's not facilitated by me, it's facilitated by a deaf person. Well, how's that going to happen? Don't worry, you're going to be fine. So my wonderful deaf colleague, Sonele, arrives, and he does the presentation through an interpreter. It's amazing. We had a phenomenal attendance of 4 people. So he does this brilliant workshop. And those 4 people go away and say, you can't believe what happened in our meeting this morning. Like, our minds are blown. And then people say, well, how did I miss that? we want to be part of that. How can I be involved? So instead of a big marketing strategy, my hot tip for the day is keep it a secret. Make people want to be involved in this from their own personal want, instead of driving it as a big push, you have to do this.
Yeah.
So a month later, I went back to the company and I said, how things going? How's our lady integrated? They're like, oh, she can't come and see you right now. We're busy with sign language classes. And I thought, well, how did that happen? Now I'm all offended because you didn't use us as your service provider for sign language classes. But the lady who we've employed is doing sign language classes with everyone. And I go into this room and there are like 30 people all signing in full sentences, not words, full sentences. And I think that is true integration.
Yeah.
Jess, what a great story. That is fantastic. Well done. And I think you're going to end off by teaching us some sign language. We'll start thinking about what you're gonna teach us.
I think we need to bring some deaf people on. My colleagues are watching, they'll kill me. Hearing people don't teach sign language, so
Okay, cool.
you'll have to watch the interpreter very carefully.
Yes, okay, good point. All right,
Richard,
cool.
can I just tap in? I just wanted to add to Nikki's comment. I mean, it was fantastic. I think what's important as well, just talking about employment equity committees. And I know that it was, yeah, Shame, sorry, I'm hijacking, so feel free to shush me, but I get quite excited. When it comes to the employment equity committee's role, I think what Nikki mentioned is really important. You know, you've got two types of experts that are going to guide you on inclusion. The one who are people who live the disability, because they are the ones that know the subtle difference between a step that big and a step that big and the real impact of it. They're the ones who know about the, you know, people doing sign language that comes in different languages, you know what I mean, and different variations. So people who live the disability are your first point of information. But remember, like Nikki's expertise is deaf. My expertise is to be in a wheelchair. So it doesn't make you the expert in all disabilities. So when you are talking about making an inclusive culture, it's important that you invite the lived experience of employees with a disability onto the committee, but also more importantly, that you get the relevant expertise. So architects on inclusive design, who specialize in inclusive design, if you're doing the building restructure, you know what I mean? Or disability awareness trainers, but like I have a disability, but I also have a master's degree in psychology and disability inclusion strategies. So you must be the expert in talking transformation and disability. Are you with me? So the professionalism must come in as well as the lived experience. Those are the two key success things in a employment equity committee's impact. The third thing I'm going to say, and that's to employment equity committees and HR practitioners and your transformation, your D&I sort of champions, is don't accept defeat. I promise you, the number of times I've been invited to go and present at an employment equity meeting and there's not an exco person there because they're running late, or it's been postponed 6 times because of something else, or they go, yeah, we love what you've got to say, but we're not sure whether our management are going to participate, or we want you to do that intervention, but I don't think that they're going to give us budget. It's not okay to stop that conversation. We need to start getting our voice and our pointy finger like flared up a little bit. Okay, and what I like to do is I like to accost the excos, and I like to say, you know, you arrive at the office and they park in the allocated parking, and then I've got a thing going, sorry, you've acquired a physical disability and you can't use the elevator to get to your office, make a plan. We want them to think, oh, okay. And then suddenly we want their computer not to work and we go, well, I'm sorry, but you can't see the screen because you've acquired a visual impairment. Now do your business as usual for 2 hours and see the impact. What you want people to do is to be inconvenienced to the point where they start to take notice. Once they take notice, they start saying, okay, I can see we've got potentially disabling factors that actually we don't need. We can get around them if I just give a bit of budget, a bit of support, a bit of, you know, clout behind that initiative. I give a bit of power to the transformation person to get that done. Combine that with the business case discussion, and it's a no-brainer. So employment equity committees and HR practitioners and transformation stakeholders, you need to bring out, don't accept defeat anymore. It's enough talking now. We've had 25 years of talking around disability. We need now proper strategies, and we need accountability. There's just one case study to illustrate. There's a group of hospitals that a couple of years ago, they were still in the boardroom. They were going, no, we're no closer to getting our 2% demographic of employees with a disability. And the CEO turned around, he said, I'm so bored of this conversation. So this is how it's going to go. You've got 5 years to get 4% of our employees, people with disabilities. And if you don't, your performance bonuses are not going to happen. End of story, end of conversation. They got like 6% demographic representation in 5 years. So I'm just saying that there needs to be more commitment to driving the agenda of inclusion, no more whispering of disability. And I think that then you'll start to see. And just incidentally, over 45 years old, the chances of acquiring a disability, like they go up like this. It's the one kind of diversity we're all going to join at some point. So think long term, think strategically, Exco. You know, it's coming. So let's prepare.
I love that. Pearl, in your experience as a diversity and inclusion professional head in your business, is the employment equity responsibility sitting with you? And if so, how is disability showcasing itself there?
Right, so in different organizations, the employment equity role sits in different places. So usually you'll find it in HR, in some departments where they have a separate transformation department, you'll find that it sits there. So it usually is in one of those two roles. And I have to agree 110% with Lisa about centering the voices of people with disabilities, that particular resource group, with your inclusion champions as well as the employment equity committee. Because for me as an able-bodied person, all my good intentions usually fall flat. And I'll give you an example. So we'll come and say, an example that I once did. Okay, we're gonna have a committee for, you know, people with disabilities. And at that time, I wasn't aware that people with disabilities are not a homogeneous group. There's neurodiversity, you know, there's, like Nikki said earlier, there's, you know, people with hearing impairments, there are people on wheelchairs, there are people with mental health issues. And the same example applies with our LGBTQI group when you know, yeah, there's no homogeneity, so you have to tread very carefully and center the voices of that group. So what we do exactly what Lisa does in all the organizations that I've worked with. We center the voices of people belonging to those groups in the employment equity forums. And we make sure that whenever we do reports, when we do policies, when there's organizational design, when there's a new product coming through, we take it to that group and we say, look at this. Is this policy speaking to your lived experiences in the workplace? What are we missing? So, but Lisa has already covered all of those things, but I find that they are our most successful resource people to go to instead of us reading or just thumb sucking and saying, you know what, this is what they might need.
So for an organization that typically, let's say a mid-sector size company that's typically got a generalist HR manager who unfortunately has to look after everything. So it's employment equity, it's training, it's recruitment, it's labor relations, CCMA, and all of that. It's like, gee whiz, like now we're going to think about diversity and inclusion. What are the top 3 tangible, tried and tested solutions to achieving an overall sort of diversity and inclusion strategy? Is that something you could maybe help us get some tangible how-to ideas from going from 0 to winning?
Well, this is the unfortunate story of diversity and inclusion everywhere. The person responsible for diversity and inclusion or transformation has to juggle everything in the organization. Anything that they don't know where to put it's like, okay, put it right there. And I think that's really unfortunate. So one of the key things that you want to do is that You want the person responsible for diversity and inclusion to be properly positioned in the organization. Otherwise, the agenda falls short. So you want that person to have direct access to decision makers. So you don't want them to go through multiple layers to start off with. Two, I love what Lisa said, don't just bring in anybody. Being an HR generalist does not make you a transformation or a diversity and inclusion professional. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of companies do in every sector I've worked with. They'll take somebody from, you chief of admin or something. Oh, we need diversity and inclusion, and we'll just put you there. Or you're a woman, or you're a person with disability, come and lead this. Be a professional, actually study something related to that and have lots and lots of experience, continuously learn and unlearn. So one is the positioning. Two, I said earlier that you want to make sure that your leaders have some sort of responsibility for diversity and inclusion. Have them as element champions. So for example, in some of the organizations I've worked with, you have EXCO members that one is responsible for supplier diversity, one champions disability and inclusion, one champions gender and inclusion, one champions employment equity, to make sure that those numerical targets that we're looking for are represented at the table. But three, another quick win, like I said, have your champions coming in and rallying the organization around this common vision of diversity and inclusion.
Superb, thank you. Lisa, are there any, like you said that the only stats we have is from 2011. Are there any tools or resources that are easy to access that you know of that we can refer people?
Look, I think when it comes to getting the data, I think you've almost got to put data together. So, for example, the way they do research, you can look at people who are getting disability grants. Now, that's one section of the population. You can get kids who are going to schools that are catered for kids with disabilities. That's another set of data. You can get employment equity conversations going from disclosure and that kind of thing. There's rumors in the mill that the Stats SA are going to be doing another census, and that they're going to have a big debates about the definition of disability and getting that pinned down. Because remember, the labor law definition of disability is very different to a medical definition of disability. And there's different versions.
There's a question that's been bugging me, how do you get registered as a disabled person? Is it a medical certificate or
Okay.
Who decides?
So, according to the labor law, you have to have a medical practitioner verified, which is quite hysterical, because when you get somebody who's missing a leg, they've got to go to a doctor to say, is my leg in fact gone? Can you just verify that? And some of our candidates get really annoyed. They're like, I don't need to go and spend the money to go to a doctor to tell me that I have this disability. But we explain it to them, and we say the reality is that you are not a person when we submit the stats. You are a piece of paper, and that there is a lot of dropping that's going on. I mean, we've had an alarming increase in the number of people with epilepsy and bipolar, thanks to our fraudulent doctors that are handing notes out like sweeties. So yes. The reality is that we need something to verify that it is. Everybody's got a glitch. I'm yet to meet a human being that doesn't have some sort of disability of some sort, okay? But it's got to have an impact on your equal opportunity to participate in economic and sort of social mainstreaming. Okay, so there's got to be a disabling factor, and that could come from your environment or your impairment or attitudes or whatever. So what we generally do is, labor law, they want a medical certificate. Okay, I will also argue quite significantly, if that child's gone to a special needs school for 12 years of schooling, I don't think that they need a doctor to verify that they have a disability because they've been to the schooling. It becomes more difficult for people who have a mental or a psychiatric impairment or something like a stutter, because it's very difficult to diagnose. So you've got to, everything about disability is around judging. It's making a judgment. You have three questions. Is it long-term and recurring? Okay. That means you can't get a temporary soccer injury and go, woohoo, tick the equity box. Okay, secondly, it's got to be physical and or mental. I'm not sure what else it would be, but it's something to do with you as a being. So it has some sort of functional impact. And thirdly, I don't like the word substantially in the definition. I think it's misleading. But thirdly, ask the question of the candidate, how has it disabled you in participating in education, in the economy, in getting a job? Once you understand how it's disabled you, then you can make a judgment. But the reality is in business, when you are submitting your employment equity stats, it's got to be a medical certificate or a recognized professional that can verify it. Does that answer your question?
Spot on.
I think because there's so much, just to add to what Pearl said earlier as well, where we say engage with professionals, thanks to COVID, we've got a new service now where we are a face on a laptop anywhere you want us to be. So if you are having a marketing meeting and you're doing product innovation, my face is sitting on your marketing innovation team's discussion, and they're going, what about if the product does this? And I'm listening and listening, and I'm going, you know what would be really cool is if it had this functionality. And then we talk about disability. Or when it comes to the maintenance team talking about renovating the offices, because we've moved out of our big offices and we've moved into a more flexible office space, I'm there in the maintenance team on my laptop and my face is there and I'm going, but hang on a second, let's think about, you know, the evacuation or the safety issue and how do we get around that? Or it's that face. So for those of you who are experts at disability inclusion, who understand disability from a transformation perspective, it's important to be in those conversations everywhere and be that, and you can be now, you can be a face on a laptop. But all you're doing is you're making sure that disability is considered in these conversations, you know, and the same would, I imagine, apply for any kind of diversity, you know. So it's very doable nowadays. And it comes back to the new way we're doing business. Make that a norm. Have that expert in the room with all discussions where that expert needs to be.
Fantastic. That's a great point for us, I think, to conclude the discussion today. Some really great gold nuggets and takeaways. I want to thank also Bulelwa, who's joined us as our interpreter, Sign. And yeah, Nikki, do you want to teach us something, please? Help us to go back into the real world to be able to communicate with people who can't hear us.
I really cannot teach you any sign language because I will seriously get into trouble, but I will offer anybody who's on the webinar today a free intro to a deaf sensitization and mini sign language workshop if you would like it. So I'm hoping that there are at least a small handful of people that are part of the same group and not 100 people in different companies, but you never know. I will put it out there. I promise we will get to you. So
fantastic. That's a wonderful offer, and I think a lot of people should take that up. So how do they get hold of you? edef.co.za?
Yeah, Nikki at edef.co.za, Nikki with a CKY.
Okay, great. And Lisa, how do people get hold of you so they can bring you in as a face on the screen for their product development or building or whatever it is?
You can get hold of me at Lisa, and that's Lesa, Lisa at bradshawlaroo.co.za, or through my website, bradshawlaroo.co.za.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Pearl, do you want to share your contact information?
So they can connect with me on my LinkedIn page. It's Pearl P. Mashabane or pearl.mashabane@gmail.com. But before we leave, I think I just quickly want to share a couple of resources that people can look at. So I know that diversity and inclusion is becoming a big buzz right now for, you know, all kinds of industries, and you're looking for, you know, how do I start this? So one of the key resources is look at global diversity and inclusion benchmarks. It's set up by a global consortium of diversity and inclusion specialists, and they list all the key strategic areas that you need to implement and how to measure them so that you know that you're hitting your goals. For mental health in the workplace, I love a TED Talk by Ashley Johnson. It's called The Elephant in the Room Has a Mental Illness. it's funny but very informative as well. For general disability policies and frameworks, the Department of Public Service and Administration has a document called Job Access Strategic Framework. So that's one kind of document that you can use and customize your disability and inclusion processes from there. But other than that, just read a lot. And the biggest resources as a diversity and inclusion person is get out of your bubble, expand the borders of your imagination, of your social circle, engage with the communities around you. That's where you're going to have, the best outcomes and the best learning.
That is fantastic. Thank you. All righty. I think that concludes our discussion. 1 o'clock on the nose. Yeah, I'm trying to keep time. A lot of these discussions. I am incredibly grateful that all of you have taken the time to share your wisdom and your insights and your guidance. And I hope for those that attended got as much value as I did. And yeah, we'll see you again next month. Next month is an interesting one. We'll be talking hopefully about the Deloitte Human Capital Report and some of the global trends that are taking place all over the world and how we can apply them in our businesses in South Africa. So thank you, everybody, and I wish you well.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Ciao.